for joining another Teach Jenn Tech. Today we have Mads here, and y'all, before like Mad gets to introduce himself and talk about what we're learning, his like Twitter name is M4DZ, and every single time until today, that is how I've been talking about him. And it's so simple, it's Mads. And now that you've told me that, I'm like, that makes so much sense. So, Mads, please introduce yourself and let us know what we're going to be learning about today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me today on the show. I'm really happy, really excited to be here today. It's been a while since I was on the show because, so I'm Mads. I'm a former front-end developer, former developer advocate. But I moved in a new company really recently, and now I'm more responsible about developer experience and so on, and not that much involved in developer relations directly, let's say that. But yeah, the fact is, most of all, I'm a dev tool nerd. I like the tools, and I like developer tools because I'm a developer. And probably one of the things that I really love to do is just tweaking things just to be sure that everything is working really well to help people to better work or better do their job simply. So it was a long journey because I'm old, and I had a long career over something like 20 years in the web ecosystem. So it was really interesting and really passionate to be there, seeing the web evolving and the web platform evolving and so on. But yeah, right now I'm mainly working on improving the developer experience with some tools. And today we're going to talk about documenting, because documentation is a key to help people to understand your project and work with your project. It's something that is not really easy to dive in and really easy to understand at first, because nobody loves documentation, So so yeah, I hope that we're gonna cover as many things as we can to help you to better understand how to well architecture documentation and so on.
Thank you.
And yeah, that's it.
Yay. And Anthony and Ben, hello, hello. Yes, I am very excited about this today, and the fact that I am not great at documentation in general. I've had roles where they actually hired someone to follow me around to figure out what I was doing. Hi, Bakari. Thank you for joining. And they literally, it took like a month from him, for him to figure out what I was doing and document everything. Where if, as Anthony showed me how to do the README yesterday, if I did that along the way, that would have been so much easier, and documentation from doing it myself. So I'm very nervously excited about today. Yeah. So where do we start? What is documentation? If you were to explain documentation, how would you explain it?
Exactly. That's a good question. What is documentation? This is a story of the trees falling in the forest, Does a tree that fall in the forest make sounds or not? Nobody is here to hear the sound. Maybe we could assume that the tree doesn't make sense, doesn't make a sound at all when it's falling. And this is exactly the same thing with documentation in a project. You can do the best project of the world, and it can be just extraordinary to help your teammates. But without a good documentation, nobody would want to use it, and nobody would want to work with it, because nobody will be able to understand how it works. And nothing is really intuitive. We have to learn every day, all our lives, how things is working and how to work with different things. So documentation is just that. It's just a way to help you to understand things and start working with different kind of things. And I guess that the key in documentation is exactly that. It's here to help people to start. And because if you don't know where to start, you just can't use anything. So yeah, README is a real good point, because when you check out a new project, especially when you work in the open and you are checkouting a new open source project and something like that, with no README at all, I'm just closing the page. I don't want to deep dive into the tool to understand how it works and so on. And it's the first thing that I'm doing each time I'm installing a new tool or something like that. The first thing that I'm doing is just to launch the command with the help flag, just to see the documentation in the CLI, just to understand, okay, is there a good documentation? What are my different options? How can I use this? Is what is intended for? And if you're not able to give that to the rest of the world, it would be complex for your project to be really adopted by different kind of people. But I don't know, when I say different kind of people, it also just be you in the future. You're not the same person today than you will be in 2 months or in 2 years. And I can't count the number of different projects that I just started without any documentation, just for myself, just saying, okay, it's just a small tool, I just need a little script to do something, just coding it easily, quickly, and 2 months later, just diving into this project and saying, okay, what I tried to do with that, I don't understand what I want to do with it. So yeah, leaving documentation, it's at first, it's also for you, just to understand your work better.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not that easy, because nobody is really good at writing documentation, and except for a few people, I guess so. But generally, developers prefer code. And I often heard in the past that many developers saying, code should be self-explanatory and so on. But I did trust it in the past. I don't trust this vision anymore, because it's not really helpful. I mean, code need you to focus really heavily on what is written to really understand it, because it's not natural language. It's a language with its grammar, with its vocabulary, but it's not natural language, and you can't read the code like you are reading a page in Wikipedia. And it's really not the same thing. So if you have to make this effort to understand what is really written in the code, you will probably miss some point of how the tool is made, or what is intended for, and so on. So yeah, you have to write it at some point. You have to document things, but nobody is really, I mean, developers are probably not that comfortable at writing. I'm not. And definitely producing documentation is something that is really, really complex to me, because I'm not good at writing. I can, but it's a lot of effort for me. So I definitely need some kind of frameworks and some kind of tools to help me to write better documentation.
Got it. And thank you for that. You just, Anthony also put in the chat about that docs are primarily for yourself, and then it's second more for others. And I feel like you said that as well. I will say I completely understand your example on we're not going to be the same person in 2 months. It has been exactly Anthony came on the show again yesterday, and he was my second guest, and we did the README for what he taught me a month ago, and I didn't remember anything that he taught me a month ago at all. Like, I was like, okay, cool. Like, and so it's interesting how quickly we forget these things and how useful it can be. So I'm excited to talk about more of the theory today. And when Ben was on the show, we did it more as a go through examples to discuss what we could or should or why something needs to be changed for web accessibility. And later on, he'll be back on so we can do examples of how to make that or how to make the changes. So I'm glad we're doing the same thing because it's a lot to go through. Now, as a very random side note, do you know why there are so many startups and API and tech companies from France? I'm still like trying to figure this out because they're as a co-organizer in the Denver API meetup, all three of the other co-organizers are from France. I just was hired as a contractor for DevRel and Community, which everybody else listening, I will tell you details later. And my boss there also lived in France and speaks French, and my last name is French. And I'm like, what? How is there like so much coming out of France specifically? And I do you know why? Do you have theories?
Yeah, we have many theories around this one, but there is a proverb in France that is saying, we don't have oil, but we have ideas. And this is probably exactly that. We are not a rich country producing a lot of resources. We don't have any petrol. We don't have we don't have any rare metals, mines, or things like that. We don't have anything. We just have our brains, and that's all. And there is a long tradition in France over the centuries about thinking and philosophy and technical thinking and so on. So we have, I guess, so really good schools in terms of techs. And not only on the technical side, for sure. There are also many things, but this is something that French people really love: make things complex, overthinking things. So I guess that we are producing a lot of good engineers, so because we love to overthink things. So I guess that's why. But it's just one theory among many others, I guess. So.
Ben just said that I hold people hostage. Like I get one guest. It's because I meet so many people. I've asked a lot of French individuals the same question just to see, because I keep meeting them, and like it's interesting. I don't know, because a lot of companies are there too. So Ben, I'm going to ask you as the one person for accessibility now. Like you were the one person. Well, and that's true, because with Bakari, I would ask him about fintech stuff. And with Anthony, I would talk one day maybe about Web3 stuff. Maybe. So yeah, I kind of asked the person from the area. So good call out, Ben. Good call out. All right. Put us back on track. So I know when we first met, you showed me a tool of I said it correctly earlier, diataxis.
Yeah, that's it.
Yes. Is that a good place to start, or is there somewhere else that you think we should go through first?
I guess that we will jump on it in a minute, but the reason I just want to explain that, but because the reason I was that interesting about documentation and things like that is that because in the long term, it's really complex to maintain a documentation. Writing a documentation is something complex, but maintaining a documentation over the time to help people to continuously find the right things at the right place, and don't have content that is suddenly outdated or something like that. It's also something really complex. And when I was young, there was something in the DuckTales comics, the Junior Woodchuck's Manual, something like that, which was for the Donald Duck's nephews. They had this kind of fictional scouting company, something like that, and they have a manual. And each time they had a question about something, anything in the world, to just open the manual, and they have a great description of what it is, how to deal with it, how to work with it, and how to get some advantage of it. And I was just fascinated about this book. What is it? How it works? What is this thing? This is just insane. How could the whole knowledge of humanity could be resumed in just one book, and with not only something really exhaustive like Wikipedia, where you have just a big description of what things are, but also a lot of instruction of how to use it and how to take advantage of things. And it was just really something crazy to me. So this is probably the things that I'm really seeking when working on documentation. Having this kind of efficiency when you are writing content to help people, not only what it is, or just a short description of, well, this is my project and this is what I want to do with it, but really something helpful. What is it? How you can use it? What it will provide you, and so on. But it's a lot of content. So you have to structure the content, and this is where the dialectics framework is entering the stage. The thing is that I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to create a good documentation and how to organize the content. And the first time I was really involved in it were in my company, because we had some kind of documentation. I'm working at a hosting provider, so there is a lot of things to cover: how to power your web pages, or to deploy, or to run a CI, or to commit some new stuff, or to configure some content, or to use some kind of database, which is MySQL or Postgre, or using a broker, or using, well, you name it. The whole web ecosystem is really complex, especially in the backend. So we had this big amount of documentation that was just built over the time by just making some additions at some point. Okay, we are missing this part, let's add it. But nothing was really well structured. So I started to handle it, and quickly I figured out, okay, we will have a problem with this one, because we really can't use the documentation right now. It's not usable. People are not finding the thing in it. So we have to revamp everything from scratch and trying to figure what the content we really need to use. And during this big search, I watched a lot of different content and different conferences. And there was one by the main maintainer of the documentation for the Django framework, which is a framework in Python, which is it's totally unrelated, but which is a framework that we are using on the platform, the company I'm working in. And he explained in 1 hour how they finally decided to decouple different parts of the documentation. And it finally leads to the dialectics framework.
Interesting. And I like the way you led up to that. And now I want to find that book and see if they have it in an English version.
Yeah. I guess that there were some editions. I had a French edition somewhere in my pile of the books, but yeah, definitely not that complex that it is in the comics, because yeah, it's just comics. But yeah, it's always fun.
Okay, and I'm going to put the link in here before I forget. So anyone else that wants to look at this, they can on the what we're using today. And now you mentioned that it was the the Django and which is a Python framework. And uh, now is this doesn't matter on the back end or using a certain type of document. Do you have a suggestion on documentation platform? Like if we want to create documentation, is there a good way to start thinking about that of where it should go before we go into what is it? It could just be me thinking about this to conceptualize, is like seeing what the big picture is to go to the small picture.
Yeah, nothing forces you to build a comprehensive whole documentation at first. It will help you, but more often, this is just you gathering some different pieces of information and trying to put everything in the same place, in the same shape. So generally, when you're starting a project, you just want to start with a really small amount of documentation, like just a README with what are the prerequisites to run the project, how to quick start it, how to work on it and develop on it. Is there some kind of conventions or things that you have to follow to work with it, how to use it quickly, probably something like a license, a list of contributions of contributors on the project, how to get support on it, because at first probably you won't have enough time to write everything. So it would be probably better if people are just popping and asking for something, saying, okay, I'm trying to do this or that, how to do it. And after that, you could progressively gather different pieces of information and trying to organize it. Mm-hmm. And it's not always true, because there is projects that are really good at writing documentation. I have in mind the Vue.js framework. This is just, to me, this is just I don't know, some kind of alien in the space of web development, because the first time I discovered Vue.js, it was with the first version, and at that time it was just the beginning of the reactive interfaces, and people were all saying about talking about React and working with React and so on. And I wasn't really convinced by React at this time. So I just had a look through different alternatives, and I discovered Vue.js, which was some kind of side project or something like that, a really small one with not a lot of contributors. But the documentation, my God, it was just terribly good. It was just perfect. I just read it like a book from A to Z, and it was just okay. After that, I felt ready to use it, because I saw the big level of how to use it and what is it intended for. But I had also the opportunity to dive into the API and the primitives and how it is working under the hood. So you are more confident in using the product because you can understand how it works. And yeah, but this is really not common. A lot of different projects don't have this high level of documentation production. And I guess this is probably because Evan, the creator of Vue.js, really loves writing documentation, so he's spending a lot of time on it. But yeah, not all projects, especially project maintainers in open source, have this amount of time dedicated to write things and maintaining documentation. So at first, producing a really small content of documentation is probably enough. But as you are working on it and as you are fixing bugs and adding new features and new things, you will probably have too much content than just you need to fit into the readmes. This is just really good. So you have to start to decouple the content and keep the readme really small and understandable for newcomers. But after that, something like a wiki is probably something really great, because you are just putting the documentation and you are just saving stuff for later. And just for the future, as a reference, like, okay, how does these things work, or how I fixed this specific bug or this specific issue, and so on. So this is great, especially when you are trying to work with different kinds of people. But quickly, you will probably have a project where in the wiki everything is just overwhelmed and just put at the same place without really a real organization or a real architecture and so on. So when you are touching this point where your documentation is not reliable enough and you don't want to read it anymore because it's not that good, and you know that it will be a pain to just find the right information into this amount of big wiki, then you will have to revamp it and to work on a dedicated, well-organized documentation. You could start with it directly at first. It's totally up to you, and it's nice things to do, but it needs you to be really focused on how to use it and how to use the content and so on. And it's a lot of efforts. And at first, you probably want just to produce code rather than writing, and so on.
I will say that I do want to get to writing more. This last week I actually posted my first blog. I felt like such a cool kid, and I do want to go back and listen to my previous episodes to go through and be like, this is what I was hoping to get out of it. This is what I did get out of it, and these are things now I want to learn. But to give more of an access to those who want to watch the videos to learn more, because yes, this is video documentation, but not everybody learns by video documentation. Yeah. I know that a lot of people learn by reading documentation, where me, on the other hand, I'm like, I'll read it. I'll probably get a decent understanding about it, but it doesn't always compute then how to do it. Or without like the screenshots or something like that. So we all learn so differently. And that's, I think, the beauty of it, of when we have video or we have webinars and we have documentation. There's so much that goes into it to read the code.
Yeah, definitely. When I'm applying at different kind of conferences, I often apply with regular talks, like 45 minutes or 1 hour on stage in front of people and just talking and explaining things and so on. But I also love to submit workshops, because workshops are a really different way to learn. You have 3 to 4 hours, or even sometimes a full day, and you are totally dedicated to, okay, we are going to see how it works, working with it, failing, fixing things, testing, and discussing with the audience. And you are just not in front of people and just clamoring and just explaining big things, but you are more into the dirt. And this is what is really interesting. And it's a different way to learn, as you said. And some people need just tags, some people need code examples, or screenshots, or videos, or demonstrations. Workshop is also good. So yeah, it's this is why producing documentation is that complex, because not all the people want the same thing. So we have to find a way to help people to access the documentation, and we need to find a way to help people to contribute to documentation, because the more contributor we will have, the best documentation will be at some point. And if you are a bit in the design side or something like that, it definitely sounds like working with personas. So we before writing documentation, and this is why I really love the Diataxis framework. It's the first question is, okay, for who are we writing this documentation right now? Who are our users of the documentation? Because this is probably not users as the product or the framework and so on. And we have to keep that in mind.
That reminds me of yesterday. Anthony and I took a moment at looking at this, but it is interesting to think about how, like, who is going to be using this, as you said, yet. And I think this is where I got a little lost, and sometimes I do, of so like, why would somebody do understanding oriented explanation instead of information oriented reference? Or, so for those who are listening and watching, I've already put this in the chat. And will you go through explaining this a bit more? Because I feel like since you're familiar with it, it could be better than me explaining it.
Yeah, for sure. I think that I really love with the Diataxis framework is that it's not a tool. Because as technical people, we often like tools because we often think that they will solve our problems, but it's not true. The tools are just the things that we are doing with it, and that's all. So Diataxis is totally agnostic. It's just a framework, not in the technical sense of the term, but just give you frame, and it's like a decision matrix. So the idea is that you can't write just one documentation, because not all the people need the same kind of content, but you will probably have to maintain 4 different kind of documentation for the same products. And they split these different parts of the documentation in 4 big sections. The first one is the tutorial side. This is exactly what beginners want when they start with the project. I'm totally new with it. I don't know how it works. I just need some kind of quick start to quickly understand how it is, and to have this really rewarding effort that suddenly, boom, it works. And you don't really understand what you are doing. You are just probably copy pasting some kind of commands or some chunks of codes, but suddenly it works, and you are really happy with it because you were able to have it running and working. And this is a really great experience. This is probably what will make the difference between leaving the product and not using it anymore because you are not able to run it and to have it working, or being able to have something, which is probably not what you want in the end, but just at start, it's a good start, So you have the tutorials, and the tutorials are all dedicated to those different quick starting guides, and that's all. They are like recipes in a kitchen. You are following the instruction, and at the end you will have a cake. And independently of the context, independently of anything, you are in a situation, you have flour and eggs and blah, 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 and you're following the instruction. In the end, you will have the same result. And you could replay it over and over and over, and you will also have the same result. It's really strong because it will structure the first impression on your product. On the other hand, you will also have some kind of how-to guides, which are more dedicated to solve a specific problem. Like, okay, in this particular context, I'm using this product, or I'm using this framework in a React application, and in this particular context, I'm facing this issue. How could I solve it? So there are more oriented guides on when I'm in this kind of situation, how could I find an answer to my problem? So it's probably some content that is gathered over the time from the different kind of issues that were solved Like, okay, you are using the product, it's compatible with this and this and this and this. So if you are using A, do that. If you are using B, do that, and so on. So it's great place. It will probably replace the wiki at some point. It's a place where you are just gathering different kind of content and different kinds of information, but they're all technical oriented. It's for practicing, for doing things.
Okay.
Third party, it's the explanation things where you are giving some kind of insights or on what is it, how this content is working. Like, we made a decision in the past. Just a little story in parentheses, but I first started my career as a freelancer, and after 5 years, something like that, I joined a web agency. And the first project I was working, I was really young. I had I don't know, 25, something like that. And so I was in this agency, and the first project I was working in was some kind of website factory made with Drupal in PHP. And they asked me to add a new site into the factory. And I was starting to work on it. And the more I worked on it, the more I was, what is this code? This is just crap. Oh, how could we work with that? How did you were able to produce that piece of shit? And this is for our clients. And I was young, and I was really not humble at this time. And I worked on the project, and after that I was okay. I do understand why we're doing things like that, and it's not finally okay. It's crap, but it's probably it could be more crappy like that than it is right now. So we have to be humble on what we are producing in our daily basis, because there is context, and there is things that are some kind of impact of what you are doing in your product. But if you're not able to explain that, and to explain why you make this decision at some point, to why I'm using this particular library, why did I fork it rather than using the main one, what was the features that was missing, and so on. People will probably quickly judge you on what you did, and it's not personal, but it's human. They will try to fix it, and they will try to do better things because they don't understand the context, and they will waste a lot of time, probably a lot of frustration, trying to fix things that could not be fixed at some point or something like that. But if you are able to give some kind of information in front of that, explain, okay, we're using this in this particular context because there is this specific things that we need to address, and so on. It will make your code and your decision more understandable for the rest of the contributors and the rest of the users. So this is exactly what the explanation part are dedicated to. The context, design decisions, architecture decisions, those kind of content that help to understand how it works behind the hood, and how you could work on it to improve it. And finally, the fourth one is the reference. That is probably more something dedicated to a big comprehensive documentation of the different parts. Like, okay, I made a component, and this component is exposing those properties, and this component is exposing those methods, and you could call this API, and so on. This is like the manual pages in Unix, when you type man and a command in your terminal to get some information. This is exactly that. So if you organize your documentation and you put different parts of your documentation in one of those four parts, then you will be able to build a really comprehensive documentation. Because what is interesting is that they are working together. I mean, if you are more interested into practical example, you will have a look at tutorials and you will have a look at how-to guides, because they are the technical side of the documentation. If you are working on understanding the basic, understanding the gears that powering the product and so on, you will probably have a look more at the explanation to understand the context and understand why it is working like that and so on. And you will have a look at the references to have a big overview and a big comprehension of the content. But if you want to study on the product just to understand how it works at first, then you are running the tutorials, and when you are comfortable with the tutorials, you will probably have a look at the explanations, because they are all dedicated to understand the big picture of the product and how it works. But if you are facing some issue at some point, and you are really working with the product, then you will have a look at the how-to guides to help you to fix the issues, and to the references just to understand the API and the content behind it. So it's well made when you are looking for a content, because you just have to ask yourself, okay, what kind of content I'm looking for? Am I looking for a big comprehensive content, or I am looking for some kind of context and so on? And you will be able to just pick the right part. But if you are contributing to the documentation, the first question is, okay, I want to add this kind of content because it's something that I miss in the documentation right now. What is the purposes of this content that I will produce to find the right place to put it in?
I know this is like a lot to take in. I had to start taking notes. So would it? Okay, words. So for example, like a README, maybe a bit more of like an explanation, and could be a bit of tutorial and how to as well, mattering on what it needs to do and how big the project is.
Yeah, because README is it's sometimes the right place just to put everything in it, and being just well organized in different kinds of chapters, like, okay, a quick start section, then a how-to section, then some kind of explanation sections, and the references could be in a dedicated page somewhere else. I'm seeing a lot of really small tools in the Unix world, just dedicated to do just one thing and do it really well. And they just have a simple README, and everything is in the README, because you don't have to cover a lot of information. It's probably a script with 3 flags and just one feature, and that's all. Don't have to produce big documentation around that. Probably a README is just enough. And everything is gathered at the same place, so don't have to follow a bunch of links and so on. But if you are working on something really huge and really complex, like a library like React or Django and so on, then you will probably need this kind of frameworks to help you well organized and keeping things well maintained over time. Another thing is that you don't have necessarily to build a big architecture and different kind of pages. You could do it step by step, just starting the product, starting your project with a simple README, and as you are adding documentation in the README, starting to create sections like, okay, I will add a simple how-to pointing to some issues or some PRs, and over the time you will refine it and have it more and more organized, but without really organizing your content in the diataxis framework, but just having it in mind and just asking each time you are adding just a few words in the documentation, okay, what kind of content I'm trying to produce and what it will be used after that. it's sometimes enough. It's just a way to put you in the right mindset to write the proper piece of documentation.
I'm also, and thank you for that. I'm also like, and it definitely is over here on the side for anybody that is wondering and wanting to go through this of so tutorials, how-to guides, reference, explanation, and then understanding users' needs, tutorials versus how-to guides. I think something that I'm not seeing here that you used as a reference, yet it's not completely clicking, is like tutorials versus reference or explanation versus reference. Like the other three seem to be pretty like self-explanatory. Explanation. Anyway, but reference, I think like would it be something like so yesterday I used part of my README had documentation that I needed to use from somewhere else, and I put in the link to that website. Would that be reference or?
Yeah, definitely. Reference is where you will have a look when you are looking for extensive documentation, which could be something directly written in your documentation, but where you will probably also point to different kind of links and different kind of external resources to help you to better understand how it works. You don't have to rewrite everything. I mean, if you are creating an interface that is using React, you won't rewrite the React documentation. You will point to the different parts of the documentation in the React framework, the React documentations that are relevant to the different parts that you are looking for. So the reference to me, it's probably something like big Wikipedia. I love just wasting time in Wikipedia. Open a page, starting to look at it, and open in the background 5, 6, 10, 12 links, because I just facing a new concept, and I'm just, okay, what that? I don't know this. I don't know this one. So I jump to the concept, read it, and so on, and suddenly it's 4 letters, and you are just saying, okay, okay, I just wanted to learn a simple thing about a plant, but yeah, it's definitely that. A good reference, it's something where you could easily go over different kind of concepts.
I feel like let's see if this one would work. So I used to work at Stoplight, and Stoplight creates API specs, design first API specs, and Gravity, for example, or Axway does API management. So let's say that they created their documentation, and explanation is why they created something or more details of it, or reference could be like linking out to what is an API. Exactly. Or like what is governance or something like that.
Yes, this is exactly that.
But then explanation could be like why for the Stoplight reference, why is design first better than code first?
Yeah, exactly. Or something really trivial, like, okay, why did we choose this yellow shade for the primary color in the design? Sometimes it's just as simple as that, why using this yellow? We're using this yellow. I have a friend that is working at a company in France, Orange, which is the telecom official provider, phone provider, and so on. And they are doing a lot of work on accessibility, and the orange, which is their primary color for sure, with a name like that, is a particular shade that is used because it's well tested in terms of contrast, in terms of accessibility needs, and so on. And this is exactly the right place in the documentation. The explanation is, okay, why this shade of orange? Because it fits different needs because it's okay in terms of contrast, in terms of accessibility, in terms of blah 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 blah. And this is just understanding, everything that is running outside the product, but which made the nest of your product.
Now, would I totally get it from like a company standpoint with documentation. Do developers ever make their own documentation? Like, hey, this is all the stuff I've ever done to go with their, like all of their projects, like their Git repository, and be like, hey, here's why I did all of these, or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know, to be honest. But yeah, and it's interesting how to and how people, especially developers, are trying to document their own lives. It's yeah, I don't know. Maybe because I'm I have a developer mind, because maybe because I'm just a dev tool nerd. I don't know, but we were currently revamping our whole apartment. You can see in the back that this is definitely not finished, but we're working on it. And yesterday I was just, okay, I want to remap, finally, I want to remap those lights because this is not exactly what we want. So I kind of remember that I have some wires that are coming from here to here, and suddenly I couldn't remember what I did because it was 1 year and a half ago. But I know that I have a lot of notes, and I just have to take my book, and in it I will find the schemas of different wiring process and so on. And I know that everything is documented. And it's really, I don't know, I'm using a lot of different tools to take notes and keep tracks of different things, And I know that there is a lot of people that are doing that, and that are not necessarily developers, I have a really good friend. She loves going into bars and restaurants, and she had a pile of notebooks where she just write everything she knows about. I have to test those and those and those restaurants, and I want to. I keep this note, and I have that in mind, and so on. So we are all taking notes all over the time. We are all documenting our lives, and yeah, it's not that different than just documenting a project. At least it would probably be simpler to document a project because it's just a small part of our lives. It's not but yeah, I don't know.
That does make sense, and I like what Anthony said to do. When I asked, do developers document their projects like for themselves and like their work, and he said only the selfless ones. And I feel like this, oddly to your example, it makes sense where people that have written journals their entire life, it may be easier for them to one day write a book because they have all of that documentation, whereas people that don't, it's just based off of memory and probably forgot a bunch. So interesting.
It's interesting what you are saying about this concept of books and so on, because this concept of books. I tried to write technical books twice, I guess, something like that. It was a big failure each time because I don't know. It's really hard for me to write stuff and produce 200 pages on a content and something like that. I don't have the I don't know, the right organization to do it the right way and so on. And it's a shame because I have a lot of personal documentation all over my notebooks and my journals and so on. So this is always the same thing. Why can't I convert those notes that I'm taking for myself into something more understandable for the rest of the world? And the complexity of the documentation is exactly that. You are not writing only for you at some point. You start for you, but at some point you are also writing for the others. and contributing and working with the others to build this documentation. So it needs an effort to twist your mindset into something that is not understandable only for you, but also for the rest of the world. And it's definitely not that easy.
And that also does make sense. In Anthony told me that it's when starting to write my readmes or something like that, or documenting, it's also a lot easier to create blog posts, because then you're and in my mind, that is like taking documentation and then telling a story with it, like what you were to be able to write your. Ooh, I haven't done it yet, so we'll see how that goes. I was like, at least I have them recorded, I have the video. Yet that is something that I really do want to do, so that way it was really helpful thinking of a way to, like, what video, like if I write a blog about a certain video or series, like for example, Bakari, we had part 1, part 2, like what am I going to do as a tutorial, a how-to guide? Why did we do it that way? References to, for his, we use Square, so references to Square. Very interesting.
Yeah. It's I guess it's a complex thing to handle it well, and you don't have to be too rude with yourself when you are working, because nothing is never perfect. So I started I don't know 3 months ago, 4 months ago, something like that. I started to write a simple blog post about my video setup, because I'm also hosting a show, and I have a conversation on Twitter with people saying, "Oh, I see a lot of different people using this tool, and I don't know exactly how it works," and so on. This is exactly my setup. I can help you. I can document that and help you to understand it well. So I started to work at first a simple blog post. It's still in the process of writing, because the more I'm working on it, the more I'm just saying, okay, I need to add that, and I need to add this, and oh, I'm missing this part too, and it starts to become some big monster, and I'm really bad at writing blog posts, because I can't just cut at some point and just say, okay, it's enough for this one, and I will make another one later, or maybe in 3 months to cover another part, or making a series. But when I'm starting to think, okay, I have to make a series, suddenly it's just, okay, but I have to architecture what I will put in the first blog post, and what in the second, and if I miss some point in the first one. So it's really, really hard. And yeah, you don't have to be too rude with yourself. Just let the content flow, and nothing is definitely done, especially in the digital world. We could also unpublish it if it's not that good, or we could just rewrite it and make another one. I don't know. I really admire people that are blogging for the last 15 or 20 years. This is just incredible. Being able to document their daily work in different kind of articles. Yeah, that's really good.
I admire that as well. And it is hard work. So for all of those out there doing that, thank you for doing it and teaching us so much. I will say that I have a lot of thoughts in my head right now that I think if we were to go through websites, I'd be like, I don't know. I feel like I need to sit with it, in the fact of comparing them for myself for a bit. And that is something that I've been learning for the entire time I've been learning live, is things may not all the way make sense. They don't need to. And sometimes we just have to think on it, or as one of my old bosses would say, noodle on it, of, just let it sit and passively think of it. And I really appreciate you coming on the show today. Is there anything that you specifically wanted to go over today that we haven't touched on?
I guess it's already a lot of things. So yeah, maybe it's good to stop it right now. And it was a real pleasure to be here. And yeah, maybe next time we could talk a bit more about something more technical, starting
Yes.
a documentation, maybe covering different parts like front end versus back end,
Ooh,
which are
yes.
different kinds of documentation to produce.
Okay.
So yeah, let's think about it. But yeah, for sure, I'd be happy to be there for a second one.
Thank you. And before we go, anyone listening and watching, do you have any questions before we end today? Because I'm still taking notes. Front end versus back end, technical. Oh yeah. You've
Yeah.
also given me like ideas of how networking is teaching me to code. The power of
Yeah,
networking is
for
teaching
sure.
me to code.
Yeah, for sure. We find. Yeah, I have a lot of people in mind. So yeah,
Yes.
I will
Awesome.
drop names.
Yes. Awesome. Well, thank you for joining, Anthony. I appreciate it because he helps me like course correct when I'm like, wait, these ideas are like, what? And awesome. Then we will schedule again. And thank you, Matt.
Yeah. Thank you
Bye.
for having me, and